you to our team. This is our meeting is now being recorded. This is our team. We have Camila Hurtado, Mary Conjuro, myself, Aminta, Fatuma Rinder Connect, and Haruna Aridomi. We're all MS2s in the joint medical program with UCSF in Berkeley. What that means is we get a master's from UC Berkeley, but we get our MD from UCSF. We're dual degree students. These are all our first year students who are joining us in carrying White Coats for Black Lives Forward. We have Ria, Justin, Jessica, Kate, and Jessa. You'll hear from Justin and Jessa today. This is their first time leading a White Coats talk today, so be nice to them. They are really wonderful and here to share their stories with you. I also cannot ever do anything in White Coats without shouting out our amazing fellow for this semester. We have Samhar Teklu. She's our public relations fellow. Soon to be queen of all fellows. That we're working on a working title, but she's the one who's really helped us make sure that you all know about the amazing work that we're doing and that you have access to everything. So yeah, shout out to Samhar. Our goals, if you haven't joined us before, we're just doing a little bit of overview of our program. We aim to strengthen pathway connections across the lengthy pre-medical preparation and med school application timeline for those who are specifically underrepresented in medicine. And so to do, we host a series of events focusing on URM pre-med students of Berkeley and beyond, obviously, as you can see by how many people are joining us today. Thank you, Samar, for dropping all of our amazing links in the chat. Please follow us on everything. We will post as much information as we can, because I think a real goal of our program is to make sure that all of this information is free and accessible to everybody. And from the perspective of the students who've just done it and often felt like we didn't have the guidance when we were trying to go through this process. So save the date for our upcoming events. On April 6th, there's going to be the AMCAS application process, where it's really a step-by-step technical how to go through filling out your AMCAS application. On April 9th, the Berkeley Public Health Librarian is actually going to come and talk about how to do a literature review and how to write for research. Some of these really practical skills that I know that I only found out when I failed at them very hard. And now we're making sure that we can pass on that information so that everyone can have access to it. Additionally, we have one more position available. I think Samhar is going to drop it. It's on our socials as well, but we have a position available that is actually going to be open beyond students at UC Berkeley to support our work going forward. So stay tuned for that. As always, scholarships are coming soon. We are working really, really hard with the school administration to make sure that we can get this to you. I think there's some issues with like taxes and things like that. So we will be announcing that soon. We have a whole team of people working on it. And as a reminder, like, we're busy med grad students and we're doing this because we care. And so please be patient with us as we figure out this process. So with that, that was my long introduction. And then we're going to go ahead and get started. I'll pass it to you, Justin.
Everyone. My name is Justin. I use he, him pronouns. So today for this talk, we're going to talk about who we are, where we've been, post-bac program types, gap years, a little bit on imposter syndrome and belonging, addressing misconceptions, and then we're going to hold a Q&A at the end of the session. So about me, next slide. I grew up in Sacramento, particularly South Sacramento. I went to community college. I'm a non-trad med student. I did a little bit of lab work at UC Davis, a little bit of shadowing, but a really transformative experience for me was Clean Katapati. During post-bac, I was part of Spanish Club, did some community health volunteering. I took 5 gap years after graduating. I'm an MCAT retaker. I'm at the joint medical program. I'm also part of UCSF's PRIME program. And my research interest for the JMP for my thesis is mentorship in student-run clinics. So next slide, please. So to kind of expand on my journey and talk a little bit more about identities that I hold strongly, I'm first in my family to go to college. During high school, I didn't participate in any accelerated programs. I went to state school for a little bit and dropped out of state school, went to community college and kind of built myself up from the bottom. Transferred to UC Davis, and during my time there, I've had difficulties finding mentorship. During those times, I worked at Target. I also worked at a pharmacy, also a temporary laboratory technician. I then did my post-bac at CSU East Bay. I also did AmeriCorps service for a year. I volunteered, got involved with local mentorship programs. And then I got the opportunity to lead my local FQHC in their health education program. And thus, before medical school, I have no publications. And for my undergrad, I don't have any letters of rec. Next slide, please. So this probably is a lot, but this is detailing what I did during my 5 years. It certainly didn't feel like a lot, but listing it down, I guess it can look like a lot. But basically, I just did things that I was interested in. Of course, I had to work after graduating, so I put the little money sign. I was a clerk at a commercial pharmacy and a lab tech in the ag industry. I was able to do a little informal trip and translate for medical students. And back home in Sacramento, they have a yearly Care Force event that I was part of. Like I said, I'm an MCAT retaker, so took my first MCAT, wasn't satisfied, but slowly found my way. Went to a post-bac program. There, I was part of Spanish club. I got to TA for physiology. But what I really leaned into was health education. I found that just very important to me, especially providing health education to folks like myself and people that I grew up with. That really solidified my path into medicine. So I was part of the FQHC, federally qualified health center, by the way, lifelong over 60 here in Berkeley. And then I did AmeriCorps service at Brookside San Pablo. Retook my MCAT. I also applied to a bunch of jobs that I didn't get. I came very close to county jobs, health education jobs, and it didn't happen. Eventually, I landed a job at my local FQHC, WellSpace Health, as lead health educator. And at the same time, I was involved in mentorship circles, both as a mentee and mentor. You can see there's me mentor, Yes to College, Valley High School Health Tech Academy, San Joaquin, Central Valley, AHEC Scholars. So yeah, I just tried to ground myself more in the community that I was in during my 5 years. And I think we'll pass it to Aminta.
Thank you, Justin, for sharing. So now a little bit about me. I am originally from Oakland, California. I'm a multicultural Black woman. My family is all throughout the Bay. I was a community college student that transferred to Berkeley. You'll see in the next slide. I also had a 1.0 in high school and was really not interested in academics at that point, but kind of had a counselor who sat me down and was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "I don't really know." And she was like, "Okay, let's set you up with community college and let's get you on a different track." So I transferred. I went to Laney, Alameda, San Francisco City, and Berkeley City College all at the same time, all while working in order to support myself financially, but also to pay for some of these classes. So, and with the support of my family, I completed 2 internships and worked all through undergrad at a lot of different places. My resume, like thankfully now looking back, I'm like, oh, that's lengthy, but at the time it was a lot of work. And I know a lot of students at Cal undergrad right now and throughout are balancing, trying to figure out how to work and how to do this application process at the same time. So if you have any questions about that, we all are really good people to ask about that. My extracurriculars in undergrad included research, some volunteering, not a lot because I had to be paid for the work that I did. I did not have the freedom to volunteer my time. I had to be able to support myself. So did a little bit of that, some shadowing, and a lot of summer internships. I took 5 years off. Like Justin, we both found that out. I found that out today, that we both took 5 years off between undergrad and grad school. I worked in substance use, HIV, and food insecurity research. And some of my former mentees that are here today actually were with me in the summer HIV/AIDS research program, which I did and then ran for about 5 years. And then now my thesis is on anti-racism in medical education and building a curriculum for HIV healthcare providers. So my journey, like I said, I had a 1.0 in high school, and I'm proud of that. That took work and dedication to not going to school. And then went to community college, like I said, worked through undergrad. I was actually a psychology and public health major, and I knew in undergrad that it was so hard to get into some of the pre-med requirement classes. And I went to chemistry. I think I dropped Gen Chem like 4 times because I was so afraid of this class. And I had never actually had a high school chemistry class, because Berkeley High, we had a substitute every day for the year. And this was like the class that I actually went to, but we had a substitute every day. And while I could quote the entire movie of Mulan, I could not tell you what a chemical bond was, because we never had a lecture on that. So I really struggled to kind of figure out, like, find my path. And then I found someone who was like, well, have you heard of like a post-bac program? And I was like, no, what even is that? And so I looked into that. I actually did an informal post-bac through the UC Berkeley Extension. So there's, it's great because we all have kind of different backgrounds in terms of the post-bacs that we did. But what that meant for me was I took some classes through the UC Extension, and it was pretty expensive. It was like $1,400 for one class, not including the lab. And so then I realized, well, I came from community college, I can go back to community college. So I took some of my classes also at local community colleges at the same time. I think I got some really good advice about what classes you can take at community college and what's better to do within a formal program. For example, like biochemistry, biology, those were more important to take in the formal UC Berkeley associated program. But like physics, no, that didn't really matter as much. I hated it honestly every second, but I did it. We all have to do it, but I did it at a community college in a place that worked for me. So also for many people right now, I know that there's a challenge around COVID world and Zoom University. I call our program WebMD right now. I took every class possible, pass, not pass. So if it's not a pre-med class that is not going to boost your GPA, and if you're going to get a B or a C, like, take a pass, not pass. That really helped me in terms of like taking a full course load every semester and working. I took the absolute maximum amount of classes that I could, not because I academically couldn't do it, but because it really helped me have some cushion in terms of my GPA. And I think especially for transfer students and non-traditional students, making sure that you have that buffer for yourself is really important. Here again are some gap year activities. I worked at San Francisco Department of Public Health in the SHARP program, which look into it. It's a great program. I did the UCSF Research URI program. I actually got that internship. I always tell this story, and if you've come to our seminars before, you've heard this, but I got that because they were putting out lemon bars, and I was walking through a building and I saw someone carrying a giant tray of lemon bars, and I was like, what are y'all doing? And they're like, oh, we're having a research internship, like Q&A. And I was like, cool. So I went, and then I got the internship, which was great. Unfortunately, we don't have lemon bars for you today, but we are here to be resources for you in terms of getting access to some of these. I did shadowing. I was a medical chart reviewer. I went to pre-health conferences, which I found really helpful, but also incredibly discouraging because none of them really talked about what it meant to be a non-traditional student. And if they did talk about it, it was kind of like an after of like, oh yeah, if you like couldn't get it together, which I don't think is the real story of non-traditional students. I think we work incredibly hard and we build our own journeys because we have a lot of things we want to learn on our way to medical school and to serve our future patients. And I'm so grateful that I did all of that because that really informs how I'm going to go into being medical director one day, how I'm going to go into being a physician faculty member one day. And a lot of that are not things that I'm learning in med school, but things that I learned in my time before, including being a soccer coach for under 5-year-olds and chasing these little kids around, and then working as a server in a restaurant. And those are two things that I talked about in my med school interview process about those are the things that are going to make me the best physician that I can be, is because I know that we are customer service representatives at heart. And that's what physicians are as well. And I really talked about that, and that worked well for me in my application process. And now I'll pass it to Jessa.
Thanks, Aminta and Justin. It's so wonderful to hear parts of your stories. I feel like I've gotten pieces here and there, and to hear it, it's amazing. I'm Jessa. I use she, her pronouns. And I am also in the joint medical program as a first year. I'm originally from Central Coast, California, called Paso Robles. And I studied international development in public health in undergrad. So part of my story was not planning to go to med school at all in undergrad, and really being surprised senior year, like, oh, I think I want to be a doctor, and what that meant. So what that meant was I ended up doing a full-time 1-year post-bac program that I will happily talk about and hope to stay positive as I talk about it. After that, I took 2 years off to work at an elementary school in East Palo Alto, and also kind of scribed, did centering group facilitation at this federally qualified health center there as well. And then I just threw in my thesis topic because I was really excited to share that. I'm really interested in pediatrics and hoping to center BIPOC caregivers in pediatrics. Next slide, please. So I am a half Filipina, half white individual. So if anyone's biracial and has to navigate that identity, feel free to reach out. As I said, I started my undergraduate career really wanting to explore international development and what it means to be working in community development in a way that's not top down and paternalizing, and really like effectively support communities. And I had a really hard time ethically navigating that. And so there was that piece. And at the same time, I was extremely interested in public health and really like working at a project level to make a difference in these like larger, like from a larger population perspective. So marching through my undergrad, didn't think twice about pre-med. I was set to do work in kind of the nonprofit sector globally, until I experienced my own kind of chronic illness journey with Crohn's disease during undergrad that really kind of stopped me in my tracks, made me realize, oh my gosh, like these were my most like hard and vulnerable moments. And I leaned so much on my care team, on my family and friends, and got to see how like meaningful it would be to work with people in those periods and states of their lives, and really kind of wanted to basically work clinically with people. And so senior year decided, I think I want to go to med school. And at the same time, I was not ready to let go of my kind of public health leanings. And so every person I talked to was like, it's either you become a doctor or you work in the public health sector. You can't have the best of both worlds. And I was really kind of discouraged by that. But I marched ahead. I was like really set on making this happen. So because I had done zero, like no biochem, physics, nothing, I decided to do what they call a career changer post-bac, where you just start from ground zero. And being as impatient as I was, I wanted to do it in 1 year. And because I was really privileged to not have to worry about loans for my undergraduate experience, I was able to financially support myself through an expensive post-bac program. So I think that's an important factor to raise. So yeah, I'll talk a little bit about my post-bac year. I went to Bryn Mawr, which I kind of say with a cringe and a smile. It was exactly what I needed it to be in terms of giving me a structured experience to get ready to get all the classes I needed under my belt, and to get the advising I needed, and to kind of march me on my way to medical school. And it was extremely exhausting and stressful and expensive. And hearing about my peers, Aminta and Justin, talk about their kind of different way of going about getting these classes, I can't help but like think twice about like, man, was I really like, was that the right choice for me? In retrospect, it's always easy to kind of say like, oh, I could have done it differently. But I'm excited to talk a little bit more about post-bacs and later on in this presentation, so we can really like dig through what the factors are in making that decision, because it really is like there's so many factors that go into what's right for you as you're navigating that. So I'll stop there, and hopefully we'll chime in later on the presentation. Thank you for letting me share parts of my story. Just kidding. I guess we're here. Post-bac programs. Woohoo. So in case you haven't learned already, a post-bac program broadly is a way to get the courses you need to be able to apply to a health professional program. And as we've kind of shown through our stories, there are different types. There's a type that I did, which was a career changer. I did all of the courses that I needed starting from zero in a year. And I know that there's some programs that are 2 years. So these are called like the career changer formal programs. And that's going to encompass like Bryn Mawr, John Hopkins, Goucher. I think Columbia's got one. So that's kind of that like end of the spectrum over there. And then there are also programs that are really focused on, like maybe you've taken most of the courses that you need to apply to med school, but there's a few that you want to perhaps take again or go a little bit deeper into biochem. So there are certain programs where you can kind of pick and choose what you need to be able to raise your GPA if that's for you, or uh, enhance your academic record. And then I'll ask Aminta to share on the informal post-bac.
Yeah, so I did, like I mentioned, through the UC Berkeley Extension, they have an option for a formal program. And I looked at it and it had like 6 additional classes that I didn't actually need. And so I asked them, I was like, so can I just like pay class by class? And they were like, I mean, you could, but you'd be missing out on like an extra semester of OChem. And I was like, that's perfectly fine with me. So I found out that a lot of these programs will also let you take just specific courses, but what will happen is that you might not get a formal letter from their committee. So that's an important distinction between doing formal or informal programs. But I knew, with advice that I give to students a lot of the time, is that I picked a couple of professors in areas that I knew that I probably wasn't going to be as strong on in the MCAT, because I didn't have a bio background, didn't have a biochem background, but I knew that I could do really well in the classes. And I decided day one, those teachers were going to like me. And so I went to office hour. I made sure that I asked them about their families and everything. But also I did build meaningful connections with my professors through that work, right? And those professors wrote me individual letters of recommendation. So you just have to think about, when you're deciding between formal and informal, whether a committee letter is really important to you. And they'll talk about that more in other seminars about med school applications. And if you really need to take all of those courses, I wanted to retake general chemistry because I had a C and I knew that I could do better than that. Second semester, I just got a B, but hey, you know, that it's still, these grades are valid and important, and your grades aren't the total representation of who you are in general, but also for a med school admissions committee. So that's why I did the informal, and it's really up to you whether or not you do them at community college. I know I saw a question that we'll talk about in the Q&A portion about how you decide which classes to take where. And I think that also another thing to think about is what kind of advising you want. If you feel like you're very self-motivated and you know what you're going to do and you have your path, informal might work for you. If you have no clue whatsoever and you really need someone to kind of hold your hand through the process, because that's, you want to take that weight off of your mind, then the formal process might be better for you because they have more formal advising, whereas the community college I was kind of on my own there. So yeah, just those are my additions to that.
So if you decide to choose a post-bac program, there's a couple of things that you have to think of in relation to yourself and what you need to proceed further in your career. Are you a career changer? Were you intending to go one way and now you're going into medicine, kind of like Jessa's story? Or like me, do you need to do like an academic record enhancer, have more upper division science classes to boost your GPA? During that time, you have to decide also whether or not you want to be a full-time student or part-time. Many programs have different requirements in how many units you take at a time. How long do you want to spend in your post-bac program? Mine was also a year, but I spent 1.5 years just to do a little bit more of a boost. Do you want to be integrated into classes with undergraduate students or only graduate students? Sometimes during informal post-bacs and also formal post-bacs, depending on the college or university, you might be in classes with undergrads. Do you want to try linking to a medical school? So there are some post-bac programs and like master's programs that basically guarantee you an interview for their respective medical school. And that can be enticing for some folks. How much money do you want to spend on your programs? So some post-bac programs are notoriously expensive and some are pretty economical. So I definitely do my research and see which one fits best for my situation. Yeah, does it matter to you whether you come out with a certificate versus a master's degree? My program through CSU East Bay gave out a certificate. Does location matter to you? I had a friend relocate to Tennessee to do her post-bac program. So Definitely, I would recommend leveraging your peer networks. Usually people in the know what's good, know what's not. And if not, there are other resources that you can look into. Next slide.
Yeah, and we give you this list of factors not to overwhelm you or just show that there's so many things to be taken into consideration, but really just to like have that pause and reflect on like what are your priorities and what is meaningful and possible for you, and just to be able to make that kind of like informed, intentional decision. So back on our AMCAS slide, I think is one, or AMC. So if you are in the shopping phase for your postbac, this is a website that you can use. They have different filters that are on the slide that you can toggle to basically start to whittle down a list if that is where you are in terms of your current process. So I wanted to share that resource. And now we're going to transition to research, which is funny that I am talking about it because I had zero research coming to med school. And that is why I wanted to talk about it. So research is a scary thing for me. It might not be for you. And I think that's amazing. But for me, I, again, was not pre-med. And so I did not do bench research, did not do clinical research. I did a little bit of social sciences with my courses that I took in undergrad, but as I finished my post-bac and I decided I was too burnt out to apply to medical school and wanted a few more years before doing that, I really thought like, I have a lot of experience doing project-based work, but I don't have any research experience. Should I, like, I've heard that the trifecta is like you do your volunteer, you do your clinical scribing, and then you do your research. And I am very clearly lacking in this one area. So I started off initially by applying to clinical research positions. And basically what I did, if this is something that interests you, is just go to different like Children's Hospital Seattle website. I looked at open positions, looked at the clinical research coordinator, see if I was eligible, and started applying through their systems. And I ultimately decided for me that I wanted to not do any clinical research, and that was a really hard decision. And it's definitely something that I feel now as I'm doing my JMP thesis research and have no experience, but I decided that I wanted to do more community level work, and I chose to work at the school in East Palo Alto. But all this to say, the main point here is the research itself, at least from my individual perspective, it matters insofar as you can speak to it and why you chose it and why you're doing it. So if you do want to do research, make sure that that piece is there. Like there's a reason why you're intentionally choosing it, and you can speak to that in your applications. So whether that means you do your own independent research project, I have a mentee who's really excited about doing an ethnographic piece in the Philippines. And he's like, how do I match that to my med school application? I'm like, what do you mean? Like, this is amazing. And so as long as you can find, those opportunities to fund that, whether that's through your institution, or I'm throwing out Fulbright out there, I know that's a big name, but whether you can find those opportunities to be able to do that, I think there's so much value and like so much experience that you can speak to in your application. And so I wouldn't discount anything that's anthropological, social science related, et cetera, in addition to considering bench and clinical and other types of research. So all this to say, like, research is broad, do what feels right to you. And as long as it's meaningful and you can speak to it, I think it's worthwhile looking into.
So I'm going to talk about this really briefly because I also people are always like, do research or don't do research or figure out your own way. And I think Jessa made a really important point about all of this really comes down to how you tell your story and how you, if you are a non-traditional student, I think weaving through the aspects that were important, that were actually the key themes across my application, was really important. And for me, that was working in health disparities research to serve my community. But here are some summer research opportunities that if you're looking for things and you want to get involved right now, I really recommend going to pathways2science.org. They have a whole database of research internships. A lot of them serve underrepresented minority students. They have them from K through 12 all the way up to graduate. So pass it along to your family, friends, your homies. Make sure that we all have access to these resources. Additionally, for some of that clinical research stuff that I was also looking into and was kind of like, no, that's not really my thing, but it might be your thing. And so UCSF is always hiring research coordinator positions. These are meant to be positions that are often only 1 year because they're for people kind of in their gap years, preparing for medical school, building in their research background. If you have any idea about what specialty you want to do, some of them do require research backgrounds. If you know that now, please tell me what to do because I'm a second year med student and I don't know what I want to do yet, and you're way ahead of the game. So you can also take a break and think about that as you go through medical school. You can also always take gap years in medical school. I didn't know that you could do that. I specifically enrolled in a program that I would get my master's with my clinical preclinical years, but also you can always, once you're all accepted at the med schools of your dreams, you can always take a year off and do other things. Some people just take gap years to just live their life. I think that's an important thing to do, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Additionally, contact tracing at public health departments right now is huge and is a big issue that a lot of health departments need help with. So if you're feeling like you want to get involved in terms of COVID stuff, I know that UC Berkeley is doing a lot of that, and I know a lot of health departments are doing that. So if you want to kind of build this like track record of being involved in like health research and, health education, all of that, contact tracing is a great way to be involved. And then additionally, volunteering for vaccine rollout. I know a lot of people here are doing that with our White Coats group. But in all of these research opportunities and in all of these professional opportunities, there's always going to be quality improvement projects that you can run and lead and then put on your resume that you ran and led something for an entire department that are often really can be really simple interventions, like making sure that providers are texting their patients using the texting portal that's already set up, like that kind of stuff. It could be as small as that, but that could have a huge impact on your patients' lives. And that could be something that you could really talk about in an application. And that's one of the things that I did. So yeah. Okay, I will pass it to myself. I'm actually next, I forgot, to talk about professional experience. So I did a lot of different things, as we talked about. I'm happy to talk to anyone about building a resume and how to talk about these things, because I think no matter what you do, there's a way to talk about it, right? If I always used to tell people like, oh, they're like, oh yeah, I like turned on the smartboard for the meeting, and I'm like, facilitated audio visual technical support for the blah, 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 blah. So like, we can work with you to help you do that. That's a big part of like this kind of work and what a lot of my mentorship has been about. But I really want to emphasize that no matter what you're doing in terms of professional experience, that you utilize it in your application with a strengths-based approach. All of the things that are the reasons that we're doing gap years or that we're considered non-traditional students, by meaning we just didn't do 4 years of straight undergrad and then straight into medical school, are all things that will help our future patient populations, because there is no one patient type and there is no one physician type either. So for all of you, if I know everyone will have individual questions and we'll get to that in just a moment, I think it's really important just to make sure that we're thinking about how everything that we learn goes into how we'll treat our patients. And also, please, if you haven't started this already, keep track of your professional developments, promotions, major projects, and things completed. Because I got to my AMCAS application 5 years later and they're like, how many hours did you spend on that project? And I'm like, literally, how would I know that? And I had to go and search through my Google Calendar for how many days I was volunteering in shifts for things. Don't do that. Build a spreadsheet right now of all of the things that you're working on, because I know all of you are doing a million things, and try to make sure that you keep track of that and what the meaningful things that you're learning from those experiences are. And in terms of if you're going to be doing professional experiences outside of the healthcare field, quarterly, if you can, try to fit in some clinical something or other. If it's volunteering, if it's shadowing, that can just help you keep up a timeline. So you can say, over these past, I've shadowed all 4 years of my gap years. Was it 1 or 2 times? Maybe. Depends on you and your availability, but you can still say you shadowed for 4 years, right? So like, obviously, like I'm making light of this, but I just want to make sure that you're building up long-term timelines of commitment, showing how committed you are to this path, because you obviously are, because you're here today. So yeah, and I think that goes into my final point on this, is that consistency is probably better than quantity. If you have to jump around for a lot of things, that's totally fine. Your life is your life. And don't feel like you have to jump from position to position to check off all the boxes on an AMCAS application or med school application. it is actually seen more positively to have been committed to something for long term. I remember interviewing with someone who had been working in hotel guest services for 5 years and had been doing all of their posts back and other things on the side. And that was really valuable experience for them to know how to like work with their future patients. And they talked about that, and they're in med school right now. So don't think about necessarily what it is you're doing, but think about how you can talk about it from a strengths-based approach, what you're learning from it that will help you as a future physician, and how you can build your timeline of consistency of demonstrating your interest in the healthcare field. So yeah. And along with all of that, I know it can be really challenging because with all of us and all of us non-traditional students, there isn't exactly that one person that you can look at and be like, oh, I did exactly the same thing that they did. And there might be, and that's awesome. I didn't feel like I had that. So that brings us to our next topic, which is something that I really struggled with in this process, which was imposter syndrome and feeling like I belonged. So I'll pass it back to Justin.
Hey everyone. So I want to invite all of us to reflect on what is this imposter syndrome? What are these feelings that I myself feel when around folks with maybe a different background than me? So for us, maybe we can reflect on how does imposter syndrome show up for us? How do we cope with it? And how did this specifically show up as you're applying for medical school or as you're going through your medical journey? And for us three, how it showed up for us while applying. So imposter syndrome comes from like a deficit model thinking, where in reality, like our own knowledge and skills are just at the same level as everybody else's knowledge and skills. Through our experiences, through the things that we've done, through our lived experience, we develop a lot of like different capitals. So we can develop like navigational capital. When I worked at Target, I had to learn how to like navigate talking to my bosses and also coordinating for my finals and midterms. And then when I was a health educator, when I had patients that worked, like I knew like, okay, like this is how you can manage your insulin regimen, for example. There's also aspirational capital. Why our experiences make us want to go into the fields that we want to go to. Linguistic capital as well. We develop different ways to code switch when we talk with different folks, but how does that show up in medicine? How does that show up in navigating academia? So we develop all these skills. So maybe I can share a little bit about imposter syndrome and how it shows up for me. So I grew up low SES, and oftentimes, even with other like, BIPOCs, like sometimes it shows up. And when I really think about it, I know for myself that I'm bringing a perspective that's definitely needed in medicine. We all know that medicine can be an exclusive club and very and not inclusive. And at the same time, when I'm around my peers, I also genuinely appreciate the perspectives that they bring and how I can use their perspectives to gain like a greater perspective on the system of healthcare. Reaching out to mentors also is very important. A lot of my mentors tell me that they still feel imposter syndrome, top of their fields, and they still feel it. So this isn't really an implication on the individual. Imposter syndrome is a reflection of like inequity in society as a whole. So yeah, during the application process, I reached out to other friends that were applying, and we could all commiserate together, but also center our experiences within like this greater environment of inequity. And that really just gave us the the aspiration to just keep pushing through. I also did a lot of reflection and book reading just to get a better understanding of everything, just things going on in my community. So as I wrote my personal statement, it went from me feeling like, oh, like, what are these things that I feel like I don't have, to like, oh, wow, like, I love my story. I'm going into this, like, this is my, this is my career. This is my passion. So I just wanted to share that.
Thanks, Justin. And I'll try to keep mine short. You said so much wonderful stuff, and we're going to try to make sure we leave some time for questions and answers at the end. So I'll try to keep this brief. I think imposter syndrome and what you said was so important about this being a symptom of a larger institutional and historical and societal kind of factors, that like there's reasons that there aren't that many people of color in these institutions, and a lot of those reasons are systemic racism and exclusion from higher education and from access and opportunity. And so the reasons that we feel this way are not because there's an internal failing of us, but rather a failing of our society. And it still feels like when you get that, I remember getting my first acceptance into medical school and being like, oh my God, did they get my name right? Like, is this really me? And I'm like there's really that many Aminta Bajan Kuyates out there that they could have messed up. But just that feeling of like, no, this isn't for me. They're going to find out they messed up. And then like 2 years later, now feeling like, no, like I was talking to my roommate and really feeling like, oh, I am here. Like, this is really what I'm doing. Like, I'm a medical student and this is what I do. And then, exams come and go, and then you live your life. And I think like, in the application process, what was really an interesting turning point around this for me was realizing, like, when I went to write my personal statement, I had so many things to write about. I had so much experience. I had so many stories. I had so much love for my community that I was like bursting with ideas for my personal statement. And I remember talking to some other students who were very like traditional, gone straight through, and they're like, I don't know what to write about. I don't have anything. I just kind of went to college and I did that. And I'm like, what? I have so many things. I have so much passion and excitement and energy. Not to say that they didn't, but just that like that was a change for me, and understanding that like my non-traditional student experience was such a benefit for me then, and continues to do that now. And so what I like, just the last thing that I'll say here before we get into Jessa, and then we'll talk about some advantages and misconceptions about this, is that nobody has to necessarily welcome you into this institution because you belong here. This is for you. This is yours. I remember talking to Fatuma, who's one of our co-leads for White Coats, and asked her, I was like, do you feel welcomed in this campus? She was like, why would I feel welcome when this is my campus? And I was like, that is the energy. And I hope that is the energy that you all feel for going towards applying for these medical schools. They need you more than you need them, because there are so many schools that will be more than happy to have you, especially with considering your stories and what you bring and the communities that you love. So that's all I'll say about that. Jessa?
Yeah, thanks, Aminta. I'm also looking at the time. I feel like we should move forward. I'll just say really quickly, for imposter syndrome, definitely something that I've also faced. And I think I walk into my classes, or at least I started this last semester, assuming that everyone was smarter than me and like knew more than me, especially because I was not pre-med forever. And I think what I've come to learn is just how knowledge is like, so I don't know what the word is, like there's different types of knowledge, there's different skills that people bring to the table, and I really enjoy finding what mine are and what I bring and what my blind spots are, and finding what others are bringing, and like dancing in this gray space of like, no, we're all like contributing different things, and there's no greater or lesser, but there's just a need for more like awareness of what we do bring and what we need to like work on bringing. And so just kind of reframing for myself, that has been really helpful. And we can move on to the next slide. So Aminta already really beautifully put the advantages of being in this non-traditional pathway. I hope that we've kind of expressed some of the really rich experiences that we've gained, and like the life that we've gotten to live before coming here. Not that life stops when we're here. I'm having a great life being in school, but it really is like gives so much perspective, and as Aminta said, a lot to write about and reflect about in your application. So I think it's really nice to feel like you're in control of your path, like you're not kind of being swept along what's expected of you, but to really pause and say, like, am I ready? Like, is this what I want? Like, what am I missing? Whether it's skills, perspective, knowledge, experiences, like, what do I need to feel like I'm ready and excited and inspired to go into this pathway? And so I totally understand that, like, pressure and feeling to like get to the next step, because oh my god, like, it's such a long path, and like we have control, like we are agents in this path and we have control of how we navigate it. And I think that that's really important to keep in mind. I love this last bullet point that I need to added: experience life, save money, travel, and have fun. If you want to speak to that, Aminta.
Yeah, I put that especially because I feel so badly for my fellow classmates who went straight through, because I turned up, I went all over the world, I saved a bunch of money that I'm like literally using right now to like survive, right? Like I experienced a lot of things before that were not just like doing the research or other things, but that were really beneficial to also my well-being and coming into medical school with the community and knowing myself. And I'm really grateful that I did that beforehand. And not none of this is to knock the traditional students, but just more of adding that. And so I'm going to skip through really quickly just our last slide. I just wanted to put these up here because I know these are a lot of things that I said to myself or I was thinking when I was applying. I was like, oh, and some people literally told me this to my face. And I was like, well, you're obviously wrong. Like, look at us. But that non-traditional students are not successful in the med school app process is absolutely not true. A lot of schools are actually prioritizing people who had more experience now. Gap years are absolutely not a waste of time. Even if you do nothing but rest and take care of yourself, that is incredibly important in terms of building strategies for how you're going to do that in medical school. And you can talk about that in the application process. That volunteering is somehow better than paid work. I don't believe that. I don't feel like, especially for asking underrepresented minority students of color to volunteer their time, is something I fundamentally don't agree with. And so we're trying to work, through white coats and through other things to create systemic change around that. But if you have to be paid for the work that you do, it is just as important and as valid as people who are able to volunteer. And also that you can only take 1 year off. I took 5. And I almost took more until my mom was like, all right, you want to go to med school. Now would be a good time for you to do that. And I was like, thank you, ma'am. That hurt my feelings. But yes, I am ready and I will shoot my shot. And I know that this is incredibly scary, but we're here to support you in that. And the last thing that we'll say before we open to questions, because I know we have some great ones in the chat, please don't read Student Doctor Network. I put this in every presentation that I do. Do not read it. It's not helpful and it is hurtful. Also be cautious of Reddit and other places there. Everyone is sharing kind of their worst moments in the application process and their fears. Online is a challenging place around that. And so please go find your messages of support and your communities of support online, but don't go into these pits of hell is what I call them. So yeah, that's all we have. To end on a positive note, I just want to say that I believe in each and every one of you, and that if I could do it with my very windy path, you can absolutely do this too. So questions? I will stop my screen share. Or right before I do that, just a reminder that we have a fellowship application that's open right now and it's posted in the chat.
Thank you all. I just want to say thank you for being like so open and like sharing about your experiences. It's super helpful. As someone that's going to do a post-bac, I've learned a lot. But before we go into the Q&A, I'm going to launch the poll. And I think we can do it at the same time. So please feel free. Yeah, please fill out the poll. And the first question that we're going to start off with is Melvin's. He asked, can you talk about certain classes you would recommend taking through a CC versus a UC Berkeley Extension or University?
Yeah, I can take that one. So definitely the advice that I was given was to take the upper division biology classes. So biology, even biochemistry, and like maybe genetics, if that's something that you want to take at the formal post-bac program. Or whatever is with a 4-year institution, because those are the ones that they really consider more. But physics, general chemistry, and even some organic chemistry isn't necessarily as required. I would definitely also reach out to admissions admissions agents, what are they called? Admissions people at the different schools that you want to go to, because they will be really helpful in answering those kinds of questions. But that was kind of how I did it, and nobody asked. like, I think my GPA, my like transcripts, I had to submit like 15. So that was a little bit challenging, but I wrote about it in my admissions application stuff because you have space to do that.
Awesome. I think Christopher has a question. I'm gonna actually ask if Christopher could speak on it. It's about clinical experience.
Yeah, sure.
Feel free to unmute your.
So the last time I did anything clinical was when I volunteered at the free clinics in undergrad, which was like over 4 years ago. Yeah, so kind of what Jessa was talking about was, taking experiences you've had and making the most of them and just emphasizing why they were important. And so for me, I think I've had a lot more research experience than I've had clinical, and I'm just wondering if or I guess like what I can do with that. Like, should I be looking for more shadowing, or like try to have some kind of like, I don't know, volunteer at a clinic again, something like that? Like, what could I do, I guess, with the experience that I've had, if that makes sense?
I can start. Thanks for that question, Christopher. I think that it kind of answers always, it depends. I think that if you feel like you are like ready to speak on the experiences that you do have and are like already convinced that you're like set for medicals, like you want to be in this path, and you can really write about those experiences as is, then if it feels like an add-on and something that you're doing to check a box, then perhaps it won't add much to like your experience and your application. But on the other side, like if you think that maybe you want to show that you're continuing to kind of follow the clinical pieces, or you want to like remind yourself of what it's like to be in the clinic and like get excited for the work that's coming up in the future, then that's like a reason to perhaps look into it. But obviously that comes at like the time trade-off of like, then what are you giving up if you're choosing to do that? So it really, it depends. But I think at the end of the day, if you can write and like express and like already talk about your experience working clinically and how it's impacted you, then it doesn't, to me, make sense to kind of shadow for the sake of shadowing. I don't know if Aminta and Justin have other thoughts.
I think you nailed it. So we can go to the next question.
We have another question about shadowing. Is it needed? If so, can you talk more about it?
So maybe I could speak a little bit on that, and I think this segues with Jessa's last comments. During undergrad, I only did like 8 shadowing. I only shadowed like 2 times, and I think that was like 7 or 8 years before I applied to medical school. So that was way back. I don't think it's a necessity. I did a lot of like clinical experience where I was like working side by side with a provider physician. And I think that was what shined for me in my application. And although I wasn't following them from room to room, I did have the opportunities to pick the brains of the providers I was working with and talk about treatment plans, diabetes treatment plans. So I don't think shadowing is a necessity, but maybe that's something that you could explore further doing clinical experiences.
Yeah, and I can just add to that because I know that like some people specifically asked me about that in my interviews. They're like, how much shadowing have you done, and do you think that isn't giving you a real idea of what this field is going to look like? Because I think that's the goal of shadowing, not that you'd actually really learn anything about medicine before you come, but that you're sure that this is what you want to do, right? Because it's a big investment. I think it's important to have clinical experience and exposure, but also the realities of right now is that nobody extra is going into clinic. A lot of physicians are doing telemedicine. If you can't get access to somebody already, it's really difficult to do that. So some of that other clinical stuff, like, you know, Berkeley has swab coaches to help people do like nasal swabbing, that kind of stuff. those might be the way to fill it in. I wouldn't add additional shadowing right now because the reality is that it's probably not going to be possible to add on. But if you have some clinical experience already, and if you have shadowed before, and you can also even just set up informational interviews. I think that's something that isn't talked about enough in terms of this stuff around talking to physicians around what their life looks like and how they do their job. And you can honestly just reach out to your own physician and ask them to do that if you don't have anyone that you are connected to, and we can help you with that.
We have another
I-
question. Oh,
I would just add one thing about shadowing. I posted the link in the chat. I've been doing a lot of vaccinations at the vaccine sites in Oakland and San Francisco. We need people that are not medical. We have too many medical, like nurses, LVNs, a lot of some doctors. I'm injecting people, and for us to sit there and doing non-medical stuff, like signing people in, flow traffic, all those different things. We need a lot of people volunteering. And if you specifically speak another language, sign up on that website. I put it in the chat because there's a huge need in California. I don't know like anywhere else, but I know that all the sites that I've gone to, there's more clinical people that are like not wasted, but we could inject people faster if they come to the front of the line, but we don't have enough people to help with that. So a lot of us get stuck doing things like checking people in, looking at computer, giving them their card. So like that's a great shadowing experience. There's a lot of doctors there. You get to meet a lot of doctors. So yeah, my 2 cents.
Thank you, Jovan. I think white coats, a lot of people have signed up for that at Berkeley, but definitely volunteering to do that as part of community is really important and great experience. I think Carson had a question also.
Hi, yes, I do. My question is about the informational interviews. How do you recommend like approaching someone for that, and what are like the most important questions to ask?
Yeah, I can take that one. I think I used to require students in my program to do them because they're super awkward and something that like you don't quite know how to do until you just do it. But the advice that I give is finding somebody in a field that you're interested in. UCSF is great because they have all of the faculty emails on the website, so you can search faculty profiles in a specialty that you're interested in, and email the person that you want to talk to and say, "Hi, a little bit about yourself. You're an undergrad student at Berkeley, interested in pre-med. And I am interested in possibly a 20-minute phone call with you." I think saying the amount of time and being really cognizant that people will not probably have more than 20 minutes, even 15 minutes of just saying, "I'd love to ask you some questions about your experiences in the field. Please let me know if you have some time." Not everyone's going to get back to you, and that's totally okay, but getting comfortable with having those kind of short conversations in advance, preparing a little brief summary of who you are, your like elevator pitch, making sure that you have only about 2 to 3 questions, and then people will just talk. Like physicians, they love to talk. Obviously, we've talked a lot, and that's why we're running over time. So thank you everyone for bearing with us. But I think important questions are, what does a day look like in your field? Like, what is your day? Like family medicine is very different from emergency medicine, is very different from derm. Like, what does that look like to actually be working in your field? What are some challenges that you think are going to be facing physicians in your field going forward? That's a great one that they like to ask in interviews. And if you could have a physician answer that for you, like, and then you can give that answer in a future interview, or, you know, with your thoughts added onto it. I think that's really good. And then also, if they have any advice for you as a student interested in going into the field. And then the last important question, is there anyone else you think I should talk to that would be willing to talk to me as a pre-medical student to enter, get an experience and exposure? Through that, I've gotten like internships, I've gotten, you know, references for scholarships, like all sorts of stuff that people are really interested in, number one, talking about themselves, but also helping people get into their field that they're really passionate about. So I hope that helped.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
we have another question in the chat asking about gaining clinical exposure through becoming an EMT, CNA, or scribe. Yeah, did any of y'all do that? Do you recommend it?
Oh, sorry, Jessa, go ahead.
I had limited exposure here. If you want to speak to it, I was just going to say, I did a little bit of scribing work. And then I think I mentioned I did work in group visits as a facilitator, which is an interesting kind of different way to look at things. But I definitely considered doing EMT. My outdoor lover and me wanted to go to Colorado and live out of a van and be an EMT anyway. So I think that these are awesome ways to get exposed. And I'm not sure, like, I can't think of other options within that, but if, it's a good way to both work with patients, get that direct clinical experience, and make money at the same time, and like live the working life. And so I would definitely think that that's a great option for people as they navigate that. I don't know if Aminta had anything to add.
Yeah, I didn't do any. I thought about doing the EMT and the nursing assistant. I actually started like in medicine because originally I wanted to be a firefighter because someone told me that like women can't do that. And I was like, dude, it's 2009, like, come on. And then I did it and I was like, this isn't like, I wanted to go like further up in the prevention field. So that eventually I got up to like, I wanted to be a physician. But along the way, I thought about doing the EMT Corps, is a program in Oakland. But I think it ultimately ended up being a big time investment and a lot of money investment into the EMT certifications and some of these like testing things that you have to do to be able to apply. So I actually ended up being trained as an HIV tester for a study. And so I did that instead, and I got to have that direct patient contact and work with people on that. So there's a lot of different ways to do that aren't necessarily that fully licensed way to do it. I know several people that did EMT before, like Nate Swetlitz did it and a couple of other people. And if you want a job and you want to take some time off and do that, then it's great. But I wouldn't necessarily say that you have to add on a certification before you come to med school. I think there's this misconception that you have to learn things before you get here. No, you can come in knowing absolutely nothing and they will give you everything that you need to know because that is the job of going to medical school. So if you're doing it because you feel like you have to learn those things before, I wouldn't say that it's necessary. If you're super passionate about it, you want a job for a couple of gap years and you want to explore emergency responsive medicine, then like, yeah, if that makes sense. I think we have time maybe for one more question, but I want to honor our panelists' time because I know that we were supposed to end at noon.
Feel free. We do have a question in the chat. How do you determine what experiences to add from high school, or do you just not do that? Or I think what they meant to say is like, do you just not add it to your list of activities?
I can also take this one. I think the advice that I got in the beginning was that most people do not put high school activities on their AMCAS application because it would have been 4 years before, right? So after undergrad, 3 or 4 years. So most people will just put college stuff. But if you won like state champion of chess or plant growing or tennis or whatever you did, or like a national award for something that's really high level in high school, then maybe, but generally people don't usually put their high school stuff on these medical school applications.
I do want to add on that you can touch upon things in your activity section with high school, not using it as like one of the 15 in the slot, but referring back to it. For one of my activities, I was like an intern at a radiology place, and I linked that to something that I mentioned in my personal statement about a really strong experience taking a family friend to that very same emergency room during high school. And so I linked it and said, like, little did I know that, 3 years later, after finally transferring to UC Davis, that I'd be in the same emergency room as an intern.
I think that's awesome. And I wanted to add, sorry, one last thing to that. In your AMCAS application, I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with this, but there's a section where you can put disadvantage. There's a disadvantage statement. So if you feel that you've experienced any disadvantage due to however they define it. And so I actually wrote about my high school chemistry class that I was joking about, but that I felt wholly unprepared for college level chemistry because of the lack of resources in my high school. And so like you can about it there. We'll have another seminar where they talk about the disadvantage statement, because again, in that you want to use a strengths-based approach, because everything you've been through is going to make you a better physician going forward. Just need to say that really clearly. But then if those things started for you in high school and you've continued them through, or that spark of passion happened there, then you can definitely write about it. So thank you.
All right, I just have a quick follow-up. So just like as a clarification, like, I don't know, because I'm thinking about like one of my experiences like is something like you said, like national like sports or something. Like, I don't know, like I guess is it more important for the 15 things to be related to medicine, or like is that okay because of like I guess the significance of it?
I can take this. Actually, Fatuma and Ria did a wonderful seminar on extracurricular activities and writing for them for AMCAS that's recorded, and I think on our website or something. Samara would know. Sorry, Samara. I'm always like, she saves us all. But I think if there are things that are important to who you are and how you will be a physician, that is important, but I wouldn't take up too many of the slots on there with things that are not necessarily medical or health or somewhat related. But I think that recording would probably have more of an answer to that question, unless Justin or Jessa have a better one.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. And yeah, maybe I'll probably just talk to Fatima offline. But I guess yeah, like the last question is, so if I'm thinking about including like how that's made me who I am in my personal statement, don't waste a slot putting it there, just sort of using it as a reference. Is that sort of what I'm understanding from Justin?
I think definitely how it fits with your story.
Okay.
And sometimes it's playing that game, like, should I include this thing from high school? Should I not? I think just ensuring that it really means a lot to you and trying to find that connection on how it's pushing you on your path.
I think that was a beautiful answer. And with that, we will conclude our seminar for today. Thank you all so much for coming. Thank you to Jessa and Justin for your first White Coats for Black Lives seminar. And thank you as always to Semhar for keeping us on track, on time, and on the internet in terms of all of the places that you saw in the chat. Please follow us. This will be posted. The recording will be posted shortly, and stay tuned for future seminars. Thank you, everybody. Bye.